Right now, in 2026, the United States military is projecting absolute, unrivaled power across the globe. As we've covered in recent weeks, American stealth bombers are flying sorties over the Middle East, and naval strike groups are actively fighting to keep the Strait of Hormuz open against Iranian blockade attempts. But to project that kind of multi-trillion-dollar global hegemony, an empire requires a secure, flawless economic engine right at home. Look at the map of North America. By all laws of geographical logic, the state of Louisiana should be the absolute most powerful, wealthiest state in the entire country. It sits directly at the mouth of the Mississippi River, the single most important economic artery on the continent. It drains the agricultural and industrial output of 31 different states. Louisiana should be the New York of the American South, but it isn't. Instead, it is a state plagued by disappearing land, stagnant economic growth, and a massive river that is actively, violently trying to abandon it. Welcome back to US Geography. Today we are stepping away from the deserts of the Middle East to look at the ultimate geographic paradox right here in the American homeland. We are going to explore how the most strategic location on the continent became its biggest missed opportunity, why the state is physically dissolving into the ocean, and how Louisiana was ultimately sacrificed to build the American empire. The absolute first thing you need to understand about the geography of Louisiana is that it is less of a geological landmass and more of an ongoing hydrological project. If you look at the southern half of the state, it was built almost entirely by the Mississippi River itself over the last 7,000 years. As this massive river travels south from the heart of the continent, it carries an immense heavy load of sediment, mud, sand, and clay eroded from the American interior. When the river finally hits the Gulf of Mexico, the water violently slows down, and all of that suspended sediment drops out of the water column. Over millennia, layer upon layer of this mud stacked up, eventually breaking the surface of the ocean to create the Mississippi River Delta, a distinct bird-foot-shaped protrusion that extends deep into the Gulf. But here is the geographical catch, and the primary reason Louisiana is in so much trouble today, because this land was created entirely by loose, wet mud rather than violent tectonic uplift. It is incredibly unstable. Southern Louisiana is not built on rock. It is essentially built on a giant wet sponge. The water table here is mere inches below the surface. If you take a shovel and dig a hole in New Orleans, it fills with water almost immediately. There is no solid bedrock to anchor to, just thousands of feet of muck. This creates a terrifying reality for human engineering. The land is naturally continuously sinking. As the water is squeezed out of the mud by the sheer weight of the soil and buildings above it, the ground compacts and lowers. Historically, the river had a brilliant, multi-natural solution for this. It would flood every single spring, depositing a fresh layer of mud across the state to counteract the sinking. It was a perfect, self-sustaining geographical cycle. That is, until humans arrived and decided to break the cycle permanently. Because of this constant battle between mud and water, southern Louisiana is defined by a distinct lack of solid geographical boundaries. In most coastal states, you know exactly where the land ends and the ocean begins. In Louisiana, that line is merely a suggestion. The southern coast is a confusing, shifting labyrinth of salt marshes, bayous, and dense cypress swamps. This is the famous bayou country. The massive expanses of marsh grasses act as vital geographical buffers against catastrophic hurricanes, absorbing the deadly storm surge before it can hit the populated cities inland. The swamps are heavily forested wetlands dominated by ancient bald cypress and water tupelo trees that have biologically adapted to live permanently in standing water. The only naturally occurring high ground are the cheniers, ancient, sandy beach ridges that run parallel to the coast. And when we say high ground in Louisiana, we mean a terrifyingly low 5 to 10 feet above sea level. Navigating this terrain historically required intense local knowledge. It wasn't about moving across land, it was about moving through a liquid landscape that changed with the tides. But the state of Louisiana is a geographical schizophrenic. North of the city of Alexandria, the swampy alluvial plain abruptly gives way to the tertiary hills. Here the geography starts to look much more like East Texas or Arkansas. This northern region is dominated by the piney woods, rolling hills covered in dense pine forests and hard red clay soil. Geologically speaking, this land is millions of years older, formed by ancient marine deposits when the Gulf of Mexico extended much further north. Most critically, this land is solid. It sits at a higher elevation, the soil drains well, the bedrock is reachable, and the footing is completely stable. Yet the economic and political destiny of the state has always been chained to the sinking mud of the South. The most critical geographic feature of Louisiana isn't the swamps or the hills. It is the river's desperate, violent desire to move. We tend to look at maps and think of rivers as static, permanent blue lines. But rivers are living, serpentine entities. As a river builds a massive delta over thousands of years, its path to the ocean eventually becomes too long, too choked with mud, and highly inefficient. The sediment piles up, blocking the flow, and the slope of the river becomes too shallow. Eventually, the physics of water dictate that the river must naturally look for a shorter, steeper path to the sea. This is the ticking geographic time bomb at the heart of Louisiana. Roughly every 1,000 years, the Mississippi River naturally changes its course, abandoning its old delta to wither and erode away while building a brand new one elsewhere. We have the geological evidence to prove that the river has shifted its mouth east and west across the Louisiana coast like a massive, out-of-control fire hose for millennia. And right now, the Mississippi River is completely bored of its current path past New Orleans. Physically, the river desperately wants to jump west. It wants to flow down the Atchafalaya River Basin, which offers a direct path to the Gulf of Mexico that is roughly 150 miles shorter and significantly steeper than the current route. If geography and nature were allowed to take their course, the Mississippi would have aggressively switched paths back in the 1970s. The main channel of water would have completely bypassed Baton Rouge and New Orleans, turning those massive industrial cities into stagnant saltwater estuaries and ending their economic viability overnight. This brings us to the ultimate terrifying geographic paradox of modern America, especially in the context of the 2026 global conflicts. Right now, as the United States military pours billions of dollars into securing the Strait of Hormuz and battling Iranian proxies in the Middle East, the entire American homeland is relying on Louisiana to process the fuel and ship the food that sustains the empire. The very river that created Louisiana and the very river that gives the state its entire economic purpose is currently being held hostage against its will. To prevent the river from jumping to the Atchafalaya, the US government built the old river control structure, a colossal, sprawling system of concrete gates and levees designed to physically force the Mississippi River to stay in its current channel. It is arguably the most strategically important piece of infrastructure in North America that nobody talks about. If this structure were to fail during a massive flood, and it very nearly did in 1973, the Mississippi River would violently jump its course. The massive industrial corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans would be instantly stranded without fresh water or deep draft shipping access. The salt water from the Gulf of Mexico would rush up the old, abandoned riverbed, permanently ruining the drinking water for millions of people. While the US military secures choke points across the globe, the most vital choke point of the American economy is locked in a daily, high-stakes battle against the laws of physics right in Louisiana. How did America get trapped in this geographical nightmare? It started centuries ago. Long before any European flag waved over the mud, this delta was a bustling hub of indigenous civilization. Over 3,000 years ago, before the Parthenon was built in Greece or the Colosseum in Rome, the Poverty Point culture in northeastern Louisiana built massive, complex earthworks. They were sophisticated engineers who understood the hydrology of the region, using the rivers for trade networks spanning thousands of miles. By the time Europeans arrived, the geography was controlled by indigenous groups who had mastered the bayous, navigating the liquid landscape with dugout canoes. But for the European empires, Louisiana wasn't a home. It was a backdoor to conquer a continent. In 1682, the French explorer René Robert Cavelier drifted down the Mississippi from Canada. Upon reaching the mouth, he audaciously claimed the entire drainage basin, from the Rockies to the Appalachians, for King Louis XIV of France, naming it La Louisiane. To control this massive continent, the French knew they had to control the mouth of the river. In 1718, they founded New Orleans. They chose a spot on a natural levee, a tiny sliver of high ground created by the river's sediment. It was a brilliant strategic decision for shipping, but a completely horrifying habitable one. The site was heavily infested with mosquitoes, incredibly prone to catastrophic flooding, and surrounded by impenetrable swamps. Early settlers died in staggering numbers from yellow fever and malaria. The city was literally nicknamed the Wet Grave. The city only survived due to a dark, brutal reality, the forced labor of enslaved Africans. Unlike the English colonies where slaves were primarily agricultural workers, in the brutal geography of early Louisiana, enslaved people were forced to act as the primary engineers. They cleared the deadly cypress swamps, built the massive levees by hand, and brought crucial knowledge of rice cultivation from West Africa. In 1803, Napoleon Bonaparte sold this geographical choke point to the young United States for $15 million. Roughly 4 cents an acre. By securing the mouth of the Mississippi, Thomas Jefferson instantly doubled the size of the country and guaranteed American dominance over the continent. By the mid-19th century, New Orleans became the wealthiest city in America and the largest slave market in the country. The river was the interstate of the era, filled with steamboats carrying the wealth of the interior to the global market. But this staggering prosperity was built on a rotting foundation of human enslavement, cotton, and sugar. When the Civil War erupted, the Union Navy recognized the geography. In 1862, they sailed straight past the coastal forts and captured New Orleans without firing a single shot at the city itself. By capturing the mouth of the river, they geographically strangled the Confederacy, but it also permanently broke Louisiana's economy. The wealth evaporated, and the state sank into decades of severe poverty, violence, and repressive Jim Crow laws. As the 20th century dawned, the state found a new geographic lottery ticket, massive reserves of oil in the bayous. And with the oil came a man who would forever poison the political geography of the state, Huey P. Long. Nicknamed the Kingfish, Long swept into the governor's office in the 1930s as a populist firebrand. To his credit, he built thousands of miles of paved roads, free bridges, and charity hospitals, taxing the Standard Oil Company to pay for it all. But the price of this infrastructure was the absolute destruction of democratic norms. Long didn't just govern Louisiana, he owned it. He controlled the legislature, the courts, and the police, utilizing bribery and intimidation to turn the state into a functional dictatorship within the United States. Although he was assassinated in 1935, his political legacy survived. He established a deeply rooted culture where corruption wasn't an anomaly, it was the standard operating system. For decades, Louisiana politics became infamous for pay-to-play deals. This had a devastating long-term geographic effect. Capital is cowardly. Legitimate, innovative businesses stayed away. Why build a high-tech factory in Louisiana if you have to bribe local officials just to get a permit? The state became highly hostile to free enterprise, favoring a closed loop of cronyism that persists in various forms to this day. Today, Louisiana consistently ranks near the absolute bottom of national lists for opportunity, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic stability. While states like Texas and Florida have exploded in population and wealth, Louisiana is actively shrinking, losing over 40,000 residents since 2020. Why? Because they fell victim to the ultimate geographical trap, the resource curse, also known as Dutch disease. When a region has a superabundance of one lucrative natural resource, like oil, it often fails to diversify its economy. Louisiana became hopelessly addicted to oil money. The state didn't innovate, they didn't heavily invest in high-tech education, and they didn't diversify. It's this reliance on petrochemicals created Cancer Alley, an infamous 85-mile stretch of the Mississippi River lined with over 150 massive chemical plants and oil refineries. While these plants provide vital blue-collar jobs, they also emit massive amounts of industrial pollution. Modern, high-tech workers, the kind that drive the booming economies of Austin or Raleigh, do not want to live in a highly polluted environment. The result is a massive ongoing brain drain. Louisiana educates its brilliant young minds at universities like LSU and Tulane, only to watch them immediately move to Houston or Atlanta for cleaner environments and better jobs. Furthermore, New Orleans is physically incapable of behaving like a normal metropolis. Because the city expanded by draining the surrounding swamps, the mud compacted. Once, the city literally dug itself into a hole. Today, roughly half of New Orleans sits below sea level, sitting in a geographical bowl surrounded by towering levees. Major corporate headquarters refuse to invest billions of dollars into a city that requires massive, continuous pumping just to keep the rain out, and that could be entirely wiped off the map by a single Category 5 hurricane. When you look at the entire map, Louisiana is a tragedy of geography and governance. It is a state built on land that actively doesn't want to be land, anchored by a massive river that desperately doesn't want to be there, and governed by a historical system that prioritized short-term extraction over long-term stability. Today, the state is frantically fighting a losing war against the ocean, losing a football field's worth of land to coastal erosion every 100 minutes. By all rights, Louisiana should be an economic titan. It acts as the ultimate geographical shield and funnel for the rest of the United States. It absorbs the deadly hurricanes so the American interior doesn't have to. It processes the oil and gas that fuels the military. It drains the water from 31 states. In many ways, Louisiana didn't fail. It was systematically sacrificed to ensure the prosperity and global dominance of the rest of the country. Thank you for watching US Geography. If you want to understand the dark geographic truths behind the American map, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below which state's geography we should analyze next. I'll see you again next week.